views and opinions shared in this conversation are personal and not connected to Faithful Central Bible Church. As a 501c3 organization, we don't endorse or oppose any political candidates, propositions, or measures. This is just for information and discussion, not an endorsement of any kind.
This man works for the city. This man is with Kappa Alpha Psi Incorporated. Let's put our hands together for Shannon Lawrence. I'm gonna get the mic up here. He's gonna come up there and he's gonna have a seat in this furniture.
All right, how's everybody doing? Let me just say something, man. I am thoroughly impressed to see all of you there. I just want to see a big smile from everybody right now. If you happen to be here, smile, clap your hands, something. There we go. So, in this next section, so first off, thank you so much to Faithful Central Bible Church for hosting. Thank you to the brothers of my chapter, the Inglewood, South Bay, Inglewood alumni chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity. Thank you so much to the Inglewood Pacific chapter of the Links. And thank you to our sponsor, Gaia 5G, who you'll hear more from or see later on today. All right, let me do this again, because Gaia 5G put some money in. So let's thank Gaia 5G for helping to make this happen. So over the next hour or so sit tight, over the next hour or so, we'll give you a break. We're gonna talk about the propositions both locally and also statewide, okay? But I do want to say this. I know most of you got your ballots in the mail. If you got your ballot in the mail, raise your hand. If you brought your ballot, raise your hand. Good. We will allow you to be able to take the presentation home with you. So, rest assured, we're going to make sure you are informed and armed and educated as best as possible for you to make the best decisions for you and your family when this is over. So the first person we're going to bring up, Pastor Bob Gay, is going to come up, and we're going to talk about the propositions. Bring up Brother Lawrence Ross. You may have seen him around. He is an accomplished author. He also is a co-owner of the Metaphor Club, which is in Leimert Park, which is a phenomenal place to go to be able to gather with friends and family and talk about really important things and do work. So. And then there's going to be another panelist who's going to be joining us. Her name is Andrea Slater. She is on the road on the way here, but she'll be sneaking in. So when you see her on stage, don't be alarmed. She's supposed to be there. Security, you don't have to stop her. She'll be fine. So let's get to the first slide. All right. So if we can go to let's go to the next slide. So what we're going to talk about today is ballot initiatives. Talk about what's going to be in your sample ballot. We're going to talk about a voting plan, and we did invite candidates to come at the end. Some may or may not show up. If they show up, then you know that this was important to them. Let's go to the next slide. So the first one, City of Los Angeles Charter Amendment DD. And this is, the ballot title is going to say Homelessness Services and Affordable Housing Ordinance. In essence, I will read the whole thing. I'm just going to give you the quick and skinny on it. In essence, what it's going to do is going to repeal Measure H, which was an ordinance, a measure that we passed a few years ago, which is supposed to pay for reduce homelessness here in the city. It's going to repeal Measure H and replace it with a 0.5-cent sales tax that's going to raise approximately $1 billion annually until voters, that's you, decide to either end it, and it's going to have new audits in place as well as new oversight that to help to maintain the money. Now here's the thing, when we look at ballot initiatives, one of the things that's important is to look at who's supporting, who's opposing, and Pastor Bob said it earlier, follow the money. So we see who's supporting it, the Women's and Children's Crisis Shelter, Habitat for Humanity, as well as LA Family Housing. People who are opposing it, don't hiss, Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, Mike Antonovich, who's a retired LA County supervisor, as well as Jack Humfrill. Now, you see it says follow the money. It's blank. The reason why is because this particular measure was put on by the city council of Los Angeles by a vote. So they elected to bring this to the voters, and so there is no money being used to promote it, but there's also no money being used to oppose it. So what the yes vote does is you will approve the half-cent sales tax. If you vote no, you will not approve. You do not vote to approve it. So real quick, what does this mean for us in our community, Lawrence?
So I'm born and raised here in Inglewood. And when we came here, I always talk about one of the things that you do in terms of, for ballot measures is that you look and, like Shannon said, who actually is behind things. And when I came to Inglewood, when we were in Inglewood, the first thing that came was the Proposition 13, which is backed by Howard Jarvis. And from that point on, anything that was backed by Howard Jarvis was an automatic I do not want for me. And the reason why is because typically they are trying to push back on the spending of essential monies toward vulnerable communities or minority communities in particular. And so when I look at this ballot measure, as Shannon said, the first thing you go is because a lot of times these measures are basically Orwellian. They're written Orwellianly, so you can't figure out whether or not a yes vote is what you really want or a no vote is what you really want. And that is not by happenstance. They're doing that in order to trick you. The way I look at it is that obviously we have a homeless problem in this country that is, and particularly in the city, that is not an easy solution, but it does require resources.
So I take a slightly different approach. There's a author named Simon Sinek who's written a number of different books on leadership and so forth, and he wrote a book which is called Start With Why. And so the first question ought to be, why? And the why is related to the half-cent sales tax. Do any of you remember ever voting for something that increased taxes to allow for the city of Los Angeles to tackle the homeless problem? Yes. Yes. And they created an agency called LASA, Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority. Does it look like they've done their job, or does it look like they failed? Now, your challenge then is, if there is a desire to provide another half-cent sales tax, the question is, how will that money be managed? Just like the question that relates to your household and your budget. If then you end up giving more money, but there is no strategy that really tackles the problem, you have another problem. Right. And that is the money is gone, but you are not able to do the kind of things that you say you want to do. So the question is, what is it that they will do? What's the strategy? How will the strategy be employed? Who's going to be hired? Here's another thing to look at. What are the salaries of the people running the program? And have they earned a very nice living off of a problem that they're not solving? We almost all give money to the solution of cancer, but cancer seems to not have been solved, no matter how much money we give. So when people were comfortable with homeless people being in Skid Row, it was one thing. And then they broke out of Skid Row and ended up south and east and north and west. And when it got west, people started complaining about the homeless problem. But they haven't solved the problem. So I want to know what's the strategy before I vote. I want to know how much is going to be spent by administrators to earn a salary. And if you listen to this proposition, it says it will be in place until it's removed. You almost certainly know it will never be removed, which means that you'll continue. They'll say the half-cent sales tax actually is spread across the board, but a half-cent is disproportionately more difficult for poor people who are at the brunt of the problem than it is for rich people. So you need to just dive a little deeper into the issue before you come to a conclusion about it. But people need to propose specific solutions to the problem, not just have you pay more money for the problem. And you need to know exactly how they will solve the problem that's outside your door and on your neighborhood. All right? By the way, I'm not giving an opinion about the ballot measure one way or the other. If you travel down Figueroa and you've seen what's on Figueroa, wouldn't it be nice to have a half-cent sales tax to solve that problem? Okay, I'll leave that where it is.
Let's go to the next slide. And just so you know, I know somebody brought up that on your ballot it may say County Measure A. So this was a city. They have a homeless ballot initiative to address homelessness. The county does also. We're going to get to that one as well. We're going to go through these city ones real quick. Some of these are a little more hot button than others. So some we may spend a little more time on. Some we could just breeze right through because they're pretty cut and dry. So this next one, if you live in a city, is going to be Charter Amendment FF, and that's dealing with Charter Amendment ER. Yeah. I got ahead of myself on my iPad here. The City Ethics Commission, essentially what this is going to do is that it's going to establish a minimum annual budget for the City Ethics Commission and increase the commission's authority over spending decisions and hiring matters. Basically, it gives the City Ethics Commission a little bit more empowerment. As you can see, there is no supporters on record, no opposition on record, and this was also put on by the ballot by a vote of the LA City Council. So, Pastor Gay.
So, we were just chatting offline here for a minute. How many of you have been tracking what goes on at LA City Council? Okay, all right. The Ethics Commission can levy fines and penalties for anybody who works for the city of Los Angeles, and can do so if they violate the terms of the ethics policies. You guys clear about that? The problem is their budget is approved by the LA City Council. So if you want to cripple their efforts, you simply don't give them the resources to be able to do their job. You guys see how that's working? Okay. So the council, through their budget, can give the Ethics Commission the short shrift with regard to the resources, the enforcement that they need to go after city council members. Well, the city council members aren't going to authorize that budget.
All right, so this is about giving the Ethics Commission more resources to do their job, but I think Pastor Bob adequately gave us a visualization on the impact of such a measure. Can I get an amen? Amen. All right. Let's move on to Charter Amendment FF. This is also in the city of Los Angeles. High level, what this does is it gives folks who are in the fire and police pensions and peace officers association, it gives them the ability to move their pension from the city of LA to the fire and police pension system. Again, no supporters on record, no opposers on record, put on by the LA City Council. Pastor Bob or Lawrence, you want to say?
This is one of those propositions that I looked at and I couldn't, without going into the weeds, figure out exactly which was a positive or negative. I really kind of like went and Googled it and couldn't figure that out. Is there, Pastor?
Yeah. Well, I can just, while he's getting his mic, I can tell you there's a thing called reciprocity. Has anybody ever heard that term when it comes out of pensions? So essentially, some years ago, the city council said that reciprocity with pensions is no longer allowed. So back in the day, did you ever hear about people who worked for the city and all of a sudden they get that plus job at DWP and then they will move their pension from Lacers to DWP's pension because it was more rich, so they were able to maximize their retirement? Yeah, you can't do that no more in the city. Can't do it. And what essentially, and there are fees associated with moving those funds, right? It's just like any other, transfer of money. Somebody's gonna get paid, even if you don't. Somebody's gonna get paid. So essentially what this does is it allows that transfer to happen, and then the cost of the transfer is picked up by taxpayers. Did I say that appropriately? Pastor Bob?
So the city of Los Angeles has a general city budget that takes care of your general problems. And then it has 3 proprietary departments. They are airport, harbor, water and power, 4, and then following that becomes police and fire. Police and fire take up the bulk of the Los Angeles city budget. The bulk of Los Angeles city budget. So whether you're on the defund police side or let's amp up and create more police, here's the reality. When I first started with the city, I was 21 years old. And I was actually still in college. Got a job as an intern. One of the first things they did was put all these budgets on a table, a long table. And we had to analyze those budgets, and then we had to meet with the departments. Departments use different kinds of negotiating tactics. And part of those negotiating tactics has to do with both building up the police department and the fire department, or it's about the movement of money and resources. In the end, you ask yourself this question, and that is, do you want to pay for it? That's what it comes down to. Do you want to pay for it? Is there a benefit that accrues to you? Now, there was a former congressman from Massachusetts who became the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, who gave a most famous statement of all regarding politics. He said, all politics are local. So no matter what you're running for, it comes down to how are you going to benefit me? Ask the question, does this benefit you? Will you see a benefit? All right? If you buy a certain car, is it going to save you, or are you just going to look better driving it? Okay? Or is your insurance going to go up? Will your car payments go up? Will your maintenance go up? Ask yourself the question, how does it benefit me? And whatever that answer is that you come to, that'll be probably how you ought to vote.
All right. Everybody full yet? It's been a lot, I think. All right. Let's go to Charter Amendment HH is next. So this one is, shall the city charter be amended to, this one, it has a few different things that just kind of, so we'll just kind of go through it real quick. It will require that commission appointees file financial disclosures before they can be confirmed, clarify that the controller's auditing authority clarify the controller's auditing authority regarding city contractors, expand the city attorney's subpoena power, authorize temporary appointments to certain general manager positions, establish a process to evaluate the impacts of laws proposed by initiative, petition, and make other changes and clarifications regarding city governance, appointments, and elections. That's a lot. That seems to have nothing to do with anything. But
At first, I believed that this was about all transparency, and then I got lost in the weeds. And then every time and by the way, whenever I come over here and I talk about voter education and I do this, I basically take it from the standpoint of the common voter in terms of looking at it. And it was there are like certain words that pop that make me start to think there's some nefarious reason why all areas shouldn't be, they don't want all areas to actually be a part of this. On the face of it, I don't have the deep dive that Pastor gave, but on the face of it, I'm looking for more transparency. I want to be able to find out who has conflicts of interest when it comes to their fiduciary, whether their financials, their personal financials, and their fiduciary responsibility as a member of government. The problem is oftentimes that we don't discover those things until late. We find those things until the investigation actually begins. My only quibble with this is the certain general managers part. and positions, because first of all, what are the ones defined that are going to be underneath the auspice of this, and what are ones that are going to be excluded from this, and why are you excluding certain general managers for a reason? That's where I would defer to Pastor Gabe. Probably would have more information about it.
So look, the new general manager of the Department of Water and Power, a Latina, was recently appointed. Her salary is $500,000 a year. Is it what? Seven? It's $750. Okay. If you've ever had an occasion to go to the LAPD new building, the new building on First Street, there's something called the Ron Deaton Auditorium that's there, Ronald Deaton Auditorium. Well, he was the chief legislative analyst, so he wrote the legislative analysis for motions that go into city council and these kind of propositions. He left that position, went over to become the general manager and chief engineer of the Department of Water and Power. He was not an engineer and had never been a general manager, but John Ferraro, the president of the city council, and he were close, and John Ferraro's name is on the Department of Water and Power building. And so he went over there. He got ill, and then he took his pension. Every day he blinked his eyes, he made $1,000. That was his pension. So you're absolutely right. The question is, which general managers, as opposed to all? Here's the next thing. When you work for the city, in any position, you fill out financial disclosure forms. And financial disclosure forms should be, did you earn any money outside of your salary? And if so, from where? Did your spouse or partner earn any money? Were your children employed by anybody? Now, it doesn't cover all that stuff. So if your daughter ends up with a mink coat mysteriously, you're supposed to declare it. But my point becomes, the ethics piece has to go across everybody, has to go across every department. It ought to be transparent so that you see if somebody if their travel is paid for by somebody else, or if they had a lunch or a dinner paid for by somebody else, because there's a reason that occurs. You probably have never taken your city council person out to breakfast or lunch or dinner. So if somebody is, you should know who that is and have some idea of what they want. So the general manager piece ought to cut across all, and it's kind of broad in terms of the way that it's written, and they probably could have broken it up into multiple propositions or ballot initiatives that would have piecemealed the issues rather than say kind of, you guys ever had apply for a job and it says, and other duties as required? That's what this sounds like. Okay.
So I do want to put some clarification, though, too. I think one of the things that is important on the financial disclosures is that it requires that commission appointees file before they can be confirmed. And I think that that's a really important piece of it, is to make sure that it's done before, so that, because what happens is commissioners have to be appointed by the city council. They're appointed by the mayor, approved by the city, confirmed, approved by the city council. This will allow the council to have a full representation of who they are and what some of the pitfalls may be should they decide to elect them. Because the last thing you want is for the city council to appoint someone, approve the appointment, and then come to find out. That's some of the, those are some of the famous last words. Come to find out. It's come to find out that there's something there. They should at least know that ahead of time. That way, the public embarrassment doesn't have to occur for neither the council nor the appointee. And it just allows everything to stay above board for the sake of everyone involved. Moving on to Charter Member II. Shall the city charter be amended to clarify? We're going to try to get through these fast. Clarify the El Pueblo Monument and the zoo are park property. Clarify that departments may sell merchandise to support city operations, include gender identity and non-discrimination rules applicable to employment by the city, and clarify that the airport commissions authority to establish fees and regulations. and make other changes and clarifications related to city administration and operations. Again, this is a lot happening in one ballot measure. I can add a little bit of color to this real quick. Has anyone ever heard of El Pueblo? Okay. Has anybody been to El Pueblo? All right, so here's a fun fact that I just like to say about El Pueblo. Do you know that 22 of the original 44 founders of the city of Los Angeles were of African descent? Yeah, just let that sit right there. And the reason why that's important, even like Pio Pico, who the first governor of California, African descent. Just so when we go to El Pueblo, or go to Alvera Street as we learned it as children, just know that you are there. Okay, but it's a city department as well as the zoo is, and what this is basically doing is that I think these are operations that the city that these departments were doing in terms of operating as businesses, being able to generate revenue, and it just needs to be kind of codified into law so that they don't get jammed up by anybody later on, and allow them to really operate the way they should, the way they're already operating. So let's go to Charter Member LL. Shall the city be amended to establish an independent redistricting commission to redraw the Board of Education district lines every 10 years in the LA Unified School District? I have a few thoughts, but if you guys have any thoughts, feel free.
So I've done 2 of these, by the way. It is a purely political process. One councilwoman famously said it's a backroom process. She said that because she wasn't in the back room when the decisions were made. Any of you guys ever watch a play where the guy said, "I wish I was in the room," or "I want to be in the room"? You know which play I'm talking about. An independent commission would take it out of the hands of the elected officials, and the key becomes the appointment of the commission, so that they are in fact independent thinkers. Almost no one is. But if you take it from the hands of elected officials, they will not be able to look out for their own interests, which is what they do. It's automatic. And so the independent commission is well overdue, and it's only because of public pressure that it is now happening. Probably should have happened about 40, 50 years ago, but politicians just weren't going to have it, but now they can't avoid the issue.
So, full disclosure, I actually served on the redistricting commission for LAUSD about in 2010. I was appointed by Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa at the time. And I can tell you what the redistricting commission does also is, and so it was independent, but we were all political appointees. We were all appointed by an elected official. But one of the things, I will say this, one of the reasons why redistricting is critically important is because for that particular, for that commission, it actually determines the lines of representation for your school board members. Why is that important? Anybody remember Marguerite Lamont? Marguerite Lamont on the school board was a champion of champions for kids in South LA in particular. That woman would fight tooth and nail to make sure that the children that lived in her district and the families that lived in her district got what they deserved, and that was the best education and resources possible. You want to make sure you have someone who sees you, who knows you, who lives next to you. That's what Marguerite did. And so I say that because the spirit of Marguerite Lamont exists in some places still, but we need to just making sure that understanding that those lines make a difference. And I can tell you as a kid who grew up in Gardena, right? And where because I lived at that time, because I lived on one side of Rosecrans, I was supposed to go to one school, but my friends who lived on the other side of Rosecrans went to another school. But all of those things make a difference when it comes down to who's representing you on a school board, and that determines where your kids go to school, that determines how resources are allocated to certain schools, that determines who's fighting for you. And even if you don't have children in LAUSD or any school or any public school district, it's still important to understand, because where the public education system goes, that's what sets the standard for an entire school system. So even if you have children in charters or private schools or independent schools, it's still important to pay attention to who's making the rules and representing your district on a public school level. So.
Yeah, that's a little bit personal for me, because my mother, Evelyn Ross, used to be the president of the Inglewood School District for a period of time. And, excuse me, I kind of saw the inside of, and I was kind of astounded about, like, wow, this is the real nitty-gritty about where resources go, which one school can thrive because of actual people literally just paying attention to a particular school, and another one can die on the vine. Because people don't actually pay attention to this. LAUSD, and one of the things in particular where we talk about like charismatic leaders who are in there, but what we always are trying to do is we're trying to make the system be the charismatic leader, so we don't have to really depend upon one particular person's actual devotion to our kids. We're the ones who actually care the most, and we want people who are appointed to those. That's the only thing that scares me, is like, who gets to appoint the people to represent us and our kids? Because oftentimes, and you don't necessarily, I mean, it's a little bit off, but you're seeing in other places, not necessarily here in Los Angeles, and not necessarily on the K-12 system, but you're seeing in other places where you see people who are not for our communities start to wipe out councils, appoint the people that they want, and they're doing it intentionally in order to make sure that in some ways they're creating a two-tiered system of education to where our kids basically don't get access to higher education, not because our kids don't have the capacity or you know, the ability to do that, but what they're doing is they're withholding resources. And it's the difference between whether or not you go to a school with multiple AP courses as a high schooler, or you go to where there's one or none, and then trying to compete in a state in which the UC system is basically resegregating. I'm a Berkeley and a UCLA alum, and those are the critical things that allow us to see our future doctors and lawyers. And it's really, I always talk about the LAUSD, and I never attended. I was a Catholic school kid, so I always went like that. But I remember when I went to Berkeley, and this was at the time of George McKenna, at Washington Prep, and I never forget at Berkeley those Washington Prep kids, and I mean, they came for bear. They came for academic bear. And I mean, I'm a Loyola Catholic school kid. I'm like, ooh, I gotta get sharper. And so that's what we want for our kids today. We know who the talent, and we know what can be, what they can exploit of their talent for the rest of their lives. And the literal lines make a determination in terms of who actually gets that opportunity and who doesn't, and where that money goes to.
And if I can add a little bit about the independent redistricting commissions, they are largely people who sign up to volunteer, and they open an application process, and they want people from the community to join. So all of them are not appointed, so it's not always a stacked deck. And so we try to encourage people to join, because they know where their community needs help and how to help figure out what the best boundaries are.
Real quick, somebody had mentioned the county Measure A. It's the same thing we talked about earlier with Measure DD, half-cent sales tax. We got it, good. Let's go to the next one. The county Measure E, fire protection and district tax measure. In essence, what this is gonna do is that it's gonna levy a 6 cents per square foot of certain parcel improvements, providing $152 million annually, limited to a 2% annual adjustment until ended by voters, exempting low-income seniors with independent citizens oversight and with independent oversight. And this is a fire protection ordinance. The supporters are firefighters, paramedics, Assemblymember Freddie Rodriguez and the firefighters, Local 1014. Opposers, Howard Jarvis, Taxpayers Association, Mike Antonovich, Jack Humphreys, and this was also put on by the County of Los Angeles. If you support it, then you will agree to a 0.6 cents per square foot a levy on certain partial improvements. If you oppose it, then everything will stay the same. Any thoughts in particular on this?
I'm thinking that in terms of how I look at the measure, climate change is obviously hitting our state in a way that's impacting it on a regular basis, where the things that we kind of grew up with mudslides and fires, we're kind of on a 4 or 5 year type of track now is every year and currently. And I think we're going to have to invest in our firefighters in order to make that, to deal with a new reality. And the new reality is that these things are not aberrations anymore. These things are going to be basically on a regular basis. And so for me, that makes sense to be able to do this levy.
I personally, whenever I see Howard Jarvis on anything, I know it's not for me or my community. So
That sounds familiar.
My people.
I don't even need to read any further.
My people.
So let's go to next slide. Measure G. Okay, so this is one, I will say this is going to get a little tricky. It's not tricky, but this one is controversial, and you'll hear why. What this is going to do is, if it passes, it will amend the LA County charter to create a county executive, create an independent ethics commission to increase restrictions on lobbying and investigate misconduct, establish a non-partisan legislative analyst to review proposed county policies, increase the board of supervisors from 5 to, ooh, that's buried in there. Increase the board of supervisors from 5 to 9 elected members, require county departments to present annual budgets in public meetings, use existing funding sources with no additional taxes to implement as detailed in the charter amendment ordinance. Supporters are a host of elected officials. It was too many to actually list. The LA Times, LA County Democratic Party, the LA Chamber of Commerce. Opposers are the LA County Firefighters Community Coalition and LA County Supervisors Catherine Barger and Holly Mitchell. This was also put on by the County of Los Angeles Board of Supervisors. Any thoughts?
So they have tried to get a county chief executive probably for the last 20 years. I think it was first proposed by Supervisor Zavier-Slavsky, and they haven't been able to move it along. So what's happened now is they've tied it to a couple of other things so that it has a higher probability of gaining success. One of those is the notion that you can have a closer relationship, I talked about this earlier, with your county supervisor by virtue of that county supervisor having fewer people. Now, what's really interesting is when this has come up and got on the ballot, for the first time, we have 5 women on the LA County Board of Supervisors. It used to be called the 5 Little Kings. That was the nomenclature, that was their moniker. When now it comes up with 5 women, it's the question of expanding. I'm gonna let you look at that, think through what's behind that, and I'm suggesting regardless of those supervising, when we talked about redistricting, the question then is, who will be your county supervisor? Would you keep the same person with whom you have a relationship now? Or will you get someone new that you did not vote for? So you need to be able to ask that question. So they didn't draw the lines first and then tell you here's where the new districts are going to be. They want you to vote for this first, and then they'll come back and tell you who you'll get or not get, okay?
One of the risks that it also runs, if it passes, is diluting the power of the community, because more than likely the borders are going to be drawn where they split up what remains of LA County and the Black community. And so that definitely is a cause for concern as far as representation goes, because we're already a smaller population in the county now. And so right now, with us having a county supervisor seat where we are still largely represented, we still have our interests represented. But once it starts getting split up, our interests are going to be diluted.
So you got a lot to think about with that one. I mean, seriously, I mean, it is. So next slide, and we can talk about that more in detail after it's over. So real quick, this is a bond measure for LAUSD to authorize, basically a bond measure for about $9 billion, which will cost about 2.5 cents per $100 assessed annually, generating about 456. I'm gonna make it easy. It's a bond measure, $9 billion. Is gonna and it will be paid off every year until 2059. The money will be used for school infrastructure. Just to put this in perspective, how many of y'all got kids and it's summertime and it's no AC in the schools? It's to help put AC in the schools as well as other improvements in our schools. Any thoughts?
So any money, even though my son is gratefully graduated from college, I am always for measures that increase funding, that works with the infrastructure. My fraternity, we did a teen event, a black boy teen event at Manual Arts, where my parents graduated from. And when I got on campus, I honestly was shocked about the infrastructure that was there. And I have a great belief that whenever you have schools and the infrastructure is basically reflecting what you think of the students and what you think of the potential for the students. And I look at that and then see that replicated throughout South Central in particular. And one of the things that we have to do is basically make sure that beyond just the basics of having an HVAC system for our kids, we need to get into the mindset that our kids deserve first-class infrastructure, even though a lot of these schools were built during the Great Depression, and the facades look fantastic on the outside, but when you go on the inside, you differently see where the deficit is, where you see they're 100 years old. So I'm always for putting money into the school system. I'm always for making sure that our kids have the best infrastructure for them to learn in.
Very quickly, the money, if approved, will not be distributed on an equitable basis.
Yeah.
Therefore, those of you who have kids in LAUSD or grandkids need to weigh in on how that money will be distributed for school improvements. I'll leave it there.
And just as a reminder, we're here to educate, not to state an opinion.
I'm sorry.
That's why you hold your elected officials accountable.
But I will say this, though, because we said got to follow the money and follow who's supporting. Supporting this measure is Yoli Flores from Families and Schools, Gene Hill with the African-American Chamber, the Greater LA African-American Chamber of Commerce, the Building Trades. Opposing it is Howard Jarvis, Mike Antonovich, and Jack Humphreys, just for full disclosure. Now we're going to get into the statewide propositions. Proposition 2. This is going to be another. Now, we just talked about a LA unified bond measure. This is a statewide bond measure. It authorizes about $10 billion in general obligation bonds for repair, upgrade, and construction of facilities at K-12 schools. The fiscal impact of it, and let me just put it. A reason why I just when we get into the statewide propositions, when you look in your sample ballot, what you'll see is a lot of times on local measures, you won't see a fiscal impact necessarily. With your state ballot initiatives, there's a little bit more scrutiny because all of these are done by the Legislative Analyst's Office. And so these are people who get paid to just think about public policy. And all of these will always have a fiscal impact statement so that you know exactly how it impacts you and then make it very, very plain and clear to you. So the fiscal impact on this one is that it's going to increase state costs by about $500 million annually for the next 35 years in order to repay the bond. Supporting it is California Labor Federation, California Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Building Trades. Opposing it, Howard Jarvis, a Taxpayers Association, and State Senator Brian Jones. Now here's the kicker. Now we're gonna start following the money. So supporting this measure are the California Teachers Association PAC, which at the last published financial disclosures, they've contributed about $1.5 million to this measure, as well as the California Building Industry Association Issues Committee has spent about $1 million in support of this measure. Thoughts?
Well, for me, it's the same virtual as the LAUSD, so you have to have the same facts, follow the same information, look at the same supporters and who benefits and so forth and so on. In the end, infrastructure's got to be done. If you don't do it, like your home, it just continues to fall down. So it's not a question of if, but when and how much.
And people think of bonds, people think of bonds as taxes, but it's actually people buying into them just like you would any other type of stock market investment tool, and so the money comes from paying it back. So it's basically a loan to the state that people are buying into, and they pay it back.
So when you vote for a bond issue, the state is authorized to issue debt. That debt is a bond. The bond is bought by major banks and institutional investors. Let me make sure you understand. A Goldman Sachs will buy these bonds. A Merrill Lynch will buy these bonds. So when you talk about the state issuing bonds, very seldom is it the general public, although it's available, but you're going to buy your bonds through one of those big banks. And the big banks will gobble up those bonds. They will then charge you a fee to be able to buy those bonds, and you hold on to those, and they accrue in value over time by the state doing it. But just understand that that's the process, is that an institutional investor might be a state education fund or something like that, and they buy those bonds, and the state treasurer is involved, the state controller, so forth and so on, and that's how that process works.
Yeah, mutual funds, CalPERS.
All right, next slide. Proposition 3. The right to marry and repeal Proposition 8 amendment. What this is going to do is going to amend the California Constitution to recognize fundamental right to marry regardless of race, of sex or race, removes language in the California Constitution stating that marriage is only between a man and a woman. The fiscal impact is there will be basically there's no fiscal impact. Supporters of it are California Governor Gavin Newsom, California Democratic Party, ACLU of Northern and Southern California, the California Labor Federation and Human Rights Campaign. Opposers, California Capital Connection, California Family Council, Freedom in Action, and Real Impact. Following the money, supporters, this is interesting, the Federated Indians of Grattan Rancheria contributed about $1 million, and Kevin De Leon for Lieutenant Governor is the second highest contributor in support. Kevin De Leon for Lieutenant Governor 2026, let me clarify that, contributed about $500,000 to this measure. Any thoughts?
So I thought we weren't supposed to offer our personal.
We're not.
Okay, all right.
So we're stating the fact.
So as a pastor, I can't offer my personal view of this legislation. Okay, so let me skip over that then, and let me go to Kevin De Leon. Kevin De Leon has a PAC committee. He raised money to run for office and then didn't make it. He's a member of the city council. He's a member of the 14th council district now. You may know his name from an infamous recording that was issued. It may be possible that he's trying to burnish his image and trying to gather votes from a certain community in support of his current election that's coming up the first Tuesday in November. I said it may be possible. I did not offer an opinion, just the possibility of that.
This is a point of clarification. Is this based upon, for example, the idea that there could possibly be a federal law ban, create precursor to this, and in allowing the state to make sure that remember the I part, the inclusive part of DEI, that we represent the values of California in terms of how we see human peoples and human rights. I want to make sure beyond who's funding it and the ulterior motives, which we may have on top of that. The crux of this, I would assume, is basically seeing every human being in California as being a human being with the same rights. Would that be correct?
I believe so. Andra, I know you.
I was just going to say that the same thing. It just solidifies what's already legal in the state of California.
Yes, yeah.
All right, so let's move off of this one before people start. Yeah. I mean, but I will say, but you can see how, but I'll say this though. This is the reason why you're here and why you being here is so important, is because everything that's on the ballot is not cut and dry.
Right.
Everything on the ballot, everything on the, some things on the ballot could challenge you. It could challenge you intellectually. It could challenge you emotionally. It could challenge you spiritually. And the beauty of the ballot is that it's your vote. It's not a collective vote until we count everything, but it's your individual feelings and thoughts and opinions on an issue that they put before you. And so, yeah, just kind of let that is, in the words of Country Wayne, let that sizzle in your spirit. And we'll go on to Proposition 4, which is the Parks, Environment, Energy, and Water Bond Measure. This is another bond that the state is putting up, authorizes $10 billion in general obligation bonds for water, wildfire prevention, and protection of communities and lands. It also will require annual audits. And the fiscal impact will increase the state costs by about $400 million annually for 40 years to repair the bond. Supporters include LA Mayor Karen Bass, California Democratic Party, the AFL-CIO, which is organized labor, ACLU of Southern California, Clean Water Action, League of Women California Voters, opposers, guess.
That guy.
Howard Jarvis, Taxpayers Association. But when we follow the money, so what you'll see on here is I didn't mention the other ones, is you'll see a S next to the organization's name. That means that they're in support of. You'll see in some other ones where it's going to say, oh, that means that they put money in opposition to. So there's no money being spent in opposition to, only in support of. That's the Nature Conservancy at $1 million, and the California Council of Land Trust Action Fund at $750,000. Any thoughts?
It, almost in the exact same way we talk about climate change, this is the exact same way I approach this measure. One of the things that people have been talking about with climate change is, they've been talking about, is that one of the resources that's going to be incredibly valuable and limited is water, and access to water, and in conserving water. Water is not, it's a finite resource. And so anything, again, that supports that type of infrastructure, typically in looking at the reality of California, may be a benefit for us over a long period of time. See how I just tried not to support something?
If I may, just remember Flint, Michigan, and Jackson, Mississippi. Both cities were turned over to elected officials who were African American, who did not know that the pipes were lead and deteriorating and that they would need to replace them. The number one issue over the next half century will be who has water and who does not have water. You think of it as coming out of your tap, but think of it as growing your food, and food prices increasing if they have limited amounts of water. So think of it that way, and then you'll understand that this has very, very significant impact.
And I can also add that our infrastructure across the state is basically crumbling in a lot of well-developed communities, and older communities. And so these are things that need to be taken care of. Some of the pipes are, as mentioned, over 100 years old. And so they need to be taken care of. And trying to find the money for them, because of the shrinking amounts of infrastructure money and dollars that are being allocated, is very key. So raising them independently is important.
A lot of questions are coming in about who is Howard Jarvis. since he seems to be, this person's, or as an organization seems to be very prevalent. So real quick, we'll just take a 3-minute hiatus real quick just to kind of explain it. So just to bring some context to this. Pastor Bob?
Howard Jarvis was a anti-tax advocate. Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association funded a statewide proposition called Prop 13 that basically put in place and froze your tax base on your house unless you sold your house or the title was transferred to another individual. And as such, people started to love him as taxes went up. So you ended up with a multi-tier tax system where your house taxes may have been frozen if you owned a house during that time. Somebody else buying the house right next door afterwards then would have their tax base increase. So the premise of the Howard Jarvis Tax Association is to minimize taxes wherever possible. They consider taxes to also be bond issues, so that they want to suggest that you'll be burdened significantly in a way that will cause you to either want to move out of the state or you'll not be able to support these initiatives. So just understand that Howard Jarvis is dead. He's gone. But the Tax Association continues, and they take stances on these issues up and down the state in every single county and every single city. So they are not a small organization, they are huge. And they have huge influence, particularly among people on fixed income who do not want their income moving away to pay for additional items that they may or may not support. That's who Howard Jarvis Tax Association is.
Thank you. All hearts and minds clear on that? All right. Let's move on to Proposition 5 real quick. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
There's a caveat to all
Yeah,
this.
there is, because the reality is that the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association is actually very corporate focused.
Yeah.
One of the components of Prop 13 was that it allowed for corporations to have those same leveled off corporate property taxes, which is why most of us are now subsidizing corporate owned properties right now. So they're not just like, they make it out like they're out there for protecting the everyday man and woman. But the reality is that they are actually largely advocating for corporate interests.
And one reason for the visceral reaction, at least from me, is that the reduction in terms of the tax revenue going into the particular cities also then meant, for example, that all of the benefits, let's say, post-World War II, going up into the mid-1970s, which kind of built this country in terms of where we're talking about the UC system, this Cal State system, and everything in terms of your local, going to Rogers Park right over there and whether or not it actually gets maintenance on a regular basis, all that tax revenue started going down and therefore shrunk. And then you start to see things that were, say, for example, if you were at I'm about to say Sportsman Park. That tells you how old I am. Jesse Owens, I'm sorry. I swear to God. Jesse Owens, and you, if you only have one swim lesson for your kids during the summer versus multiple. And that had an effect a lot within the black community in particular.
Great, thank you. All right, now all hearts and minds clear.
Right.
So Proposition 5, real quick, what it does is that it's going to essentially lower, if it passes, it lowers the vote threshold from 2/3, which is 66.67%, to 55% for local bond measures to fund housing projects and public infrastructure. I'm trying to go through this quick. Supporters, some of the usual players we've seen before: California Democratic Party, Labor Federation, ACLU. Opposers: Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, California Republican Party, California Chamber of Commerce, California Taxpayers. Now, money in support of this comes from the MPH Action Fund Political Issues Committee at $2.5 million, and there's about $1.5 million being spent in opposition, or that was given in opposition from the California Business Roundtable Issues PAC. Any thoughts?
Another legacy of Prop 13 was that 2/3 requirement for any funding that was going to be a tax, and that's why it's so hard for us to get things paid for and done across the state. And so they, of course, want to eliminate it because it's very difficult to get a 2/3 majority on anything.
So in full disclosure, my wife for the past 34 years, is an affordable housing advocate. She builds affordable housing and lends on it and so forth. So I am an affordable housing advocate. The question is always where it's being built, and is it simply rental, or is it putting you into a legacy position for home ownership? And so the vote is good if it allows for there to be more affordable housing projects built for individuals who are in need. What we know is rents are going up, and therefore it's more difficult for people to find affordable housing, both as rental is more competitive, and then also to qualify for home ownership or home ownership subsidy. So if it frees that money to be able to do that, then you've got to track the money once it's approved, if it's approved, to make sure the projects go into the areas that are in highest need.
California is kind of in the midst of a single home epidemic, which we've had for like the last 30 or 40 years, which is really counter to what we actually really need. For example, like, Los Angeles should have, I think, around 10 million different types of units, and I think we have like 3.5 million, and it gets exacerbated. It's resources in terms of land resources in particular are that is as we build these homes, we obviously have NIMBY when it comes to affordable housing, and then the other thing is in terms of making sure. Pastor Gay is making sure that the developers who actually do this affordable housing make sure that they don't we'll do a 10% affordable housing, and then everything else is at market rate or higher. And oftentimes you will see types of projects like that which come in with a proposal, and then by the time it gets there, it's basically market rates, which does not improve for two different groups. Folks who, for example, like my son is 25, who's coming back to Los Angeles and needs to get an apartment but can't afford one. And those are the things that we have to look at, whether or not those kids are going to stay in California, or the brain drain to go to Georgia or to other places, and that affects our community.
Prop 6, please. What this is going to do is that it will amend the California Constitution to remove the current provision, right now, current provision that allows jails and prisons to impose involuntary servitude to punish crime, i.e. forcing incarcerated persons to work. Supporters of removing this provision: Senator Steve Bradford, California Labor Federation, Abolish Slavery Network. Opposers: Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. There's been about $220,000 spent by All of Us or None Action Network in support of, as well as the Anti-Recidivism Coalition at about $125,000. Let me just say, it's a full disclosure. We have to power through this. If it's something that's burning that you want to say, we'll say it. If it's not, then let's keep going.
I'll just do it very quickly. 5 words: Michelle Alexander, the new Jim Crow.
Yeah. All right. Any questions? All right. Prop 32, $18 minimum wage initiative. Basically what this is going to do is that it's going to raise minimum wage to $18 an hour by 2026 for all employers, and thereafter adjusting the rate annually by increasing the cost of living. The fiscal impact is unclear, and change is unclear, but it's going to increase state and local government costs, likely between $500 million and a few $1 billion. Supporters include Senator Tony Atkins, Democratic Party, ACLU, Labor Federation. Opposers: Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, California Chamber of Commerce. In support, it's interesting, there's one donor who contributed $10 million in support of this, and that's Joe Sandberg, and there's about $30,000 collectively coming from, in opposition, from the California Grocers Association and the California Restaurant Association. Any thoughts?
As a small business owner, wages are a moral issue to me, and in terms of how one actually values your employees. And people deserve a living wage. And so there's, at no point in time, how I look at in terms of the people, I'm a worker in theory for my company, but every single worker deserves a living wage, and if they are working and they're doing a great job for me, I should be happy as a business owner. I should be happy to be able to afford that wage.
So Prop 33 is going to prohibit state limitations and on local rent and rent control initiative. I know we've all seen the commercials. This one could get juicy, these next couple. So we're going to try to get through this as quickly as possible because there's still other initiatives, but we also want to make sure that we feel comfortable understanding the issue when it's over.
Isn't this proposition basically a one real issue proposition that is in opposition with AIDS healthcare because they are advocating for rent control? Am I correct?
Actually, okay, so full disclosure, I've worked on 2 different iterations of this, and Weinstein's involvement has been like why it has not passed. I'll be honest. But
Oh, the mic.
Mike.
oh, sorry. But what this does, and it's not to say that these have not been good laws, it's just that they have not been informing the public as well as they should have been. What this does, we have a loophole in the state around housing laws and rental properties that exempts single-family homes. And so what that means is, and I can tell you from my experience, we lived in Vallejo for 7 years. Our landlord was 5 guys who each chipped in $5,000, and in the course of less than 10 years, bought over 500 single-family homes that they are renting out. So these commercials are making it out like they're trying to tell, what is it like? They're trying to tell homeowners what they can do with their property.
Right.
They're not worried about you. They are not worried about you. These are groups that are literally getting through the loopholes around renter protections by buying single-family homes as opposed to multifamily homes, and they're able to give crazy rent increases. There are people in communities that were receiving over $1,000 increases within a year. And so condominiums fall under that. And so what this does is help close that loophole for protections for renters.
So some of your comments are going to be edited out. Any other thoughts? So real quick, I do want to say the people in support of this are the LA County Board of Supervisors, California Democratic Party, the Nurses Association, as well as Housing as a Human Right. Folks in opposition, let me just say this. Politics often makes for strange bedfellows. And this is a great example of that. Because in opposition to this is Tony Atkins, who's also the Senate president of the California, as well as the Republican Party of California, the Apartment Association of Greater LA, and the California Chamber of Commerce. And so when you look at this, go home, this might be one you might need to be in prayer over. This one can be emotionally challenging, intellectually challenging, the whole nine. But it's more complicated than, it can be more complicated than what appears on paper. And we could talk about it more when the cameras go off.
Follow the money, is the Apartment Association going to be helping out renters?
As well as in support of, and they're spending about $35 million. And in support of this is the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, spending about $34 million or so.
And so just to give a little bit of background, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation actually jumped into housing after prescription drug because of the discrimination that gay individuals were facing regarding being able to get housing here in California. So that's why the AIDS Healthcare Foundation moved into the housing area, and then also realized that there were a lot of other issues that were going on. Reentry folk were being discriminated against. You can just go down the line. We had to get a law where you couldn't ban people with kids from being able to rent. So there have just been a lot of housing discrimination laws that they have been able to get behind. And then also in regards to our elected officials, not calling anybody out, but a lot of our elected officials receive their money from developers. Yeah. And that is part of the reason why they are on the fence or not willing to back this.
So real quick, because we're on a time crunch, Prop 34, it requires certain participants in Medi-Cal prescription drugs program to spend 98% of revenue on patient care. Essentially, what this is going to do is it applies only to healthcare providers that spend only $100 million in a 10-year period on anything other than direct patient care and operated multifamily housing with over 500 high severity health and safety violations. And it's going to require them to spend 98% of revenues from federal discount prescription drug programs on direct patient care. Supporters, State Senator Evan Lowe, Republican Party of California, ALS Association, and the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. In opposition, former LA Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, Housing is a Human Right. Again, about $29.5 million was contributed from the California Apartment Association, and about $1 million in opposition has been contributed from the AIDS Healthcare Foundation.
And this is how, as a voter, you can get tripped up, because this is what I was actually talking about. They can sometimes put propositions that look alike, and then you go, yes, I know, I definitely want yes, and definitely no. So this is the one I'm talking about that is really specifically what they're trying to do is, if I'm correct, they're trying to restrain AIDS healthcare from actually advocating based upon the revenue that they have coming in. And it's basically specifically just for AIDS healthcare. That's in terms of how it's looked upon.
All right, Prop 35, Managed Care Organization Tax Authorization Initiative. Essentially what this does is that it will permanently authorize a tax on managed care organizations based on monthly enrollees, which is set to expire in 2026, requiring revenues to be used for increased Medi-Cal programs. Supporters, Senator Tony Atkins, California Democratic Party, watch this, bedfellows, the California Democratic Party and the California Republican Party, California Dental Association, Hospital Association, and Medical Association. In opposition, former Controller Betty Yee, the California Alliance for Retired Americans, League of Women Voters of California. Following the money, about $15 million has been spent on behalf of the California hospitals, from the California hospitals, and $10 million from the Global Medical Response. Any thoughts?
Follow the money. Sometimes when an former elected official gives their name to something, it's because they work for someone else. Just a clue.
And the NAACP.
And let's go to Prop 36. Prop 36, Drug and Theft, Crime Penalties and Treatment Mandated Felonies Initiative. And what this is going to do is it will allow felony charges for possessing certain drugs, including fentanyl, and thefts under $950, both currently chargeable as misdemeanors with 2 prior drug or 2 prior theft convictions as applicable. Defendants who plead guilty to felony drug possession and complete treatment can have their charges dismissed. That's the quick and skinny of it. The supporters are U.S. Representative Ken Calvert, Senator Dave Min, the Republican Party of California, Home Depot, and the California District Attorneys Association. In opposition, California Governor Gavin Newsom, Senator Lola Smallwood Cuevas, the California Democratic Party, and Civil Rights Corps, the P is silent, Corps. And following the money in support is Walmart at $3.5 million, and Target. Those are some strange bedfellows too, right? Yeah. And $1.5 million. In opposition, Stacey S. Schusterman at $325,000, and Patty Quillen. Any thoughts?
So this tends to get, if you've been like me and you've gone into a major supermarket and a lot of what you want to buy is locked up. And you've got to either ring a bell or go grab somebody, and that is because of the amount of theft that is taking place, particularly in certain communities. And as a result, it's a challenge. This issue is at the heart of the DA's contest, by the way, here in LA County. So pay attention to that issue. It doesn't mean people will stop stealing. This has to do with the penalties that are incurred, and they often involve minorities who are doing this, but there are also, aside from individuals who might want to get some toothpaste, there are rings that are going in, stealing stuff, and then selling it out on the street. So you've got a couple of different things going on in terms of the crime issue and the penalty issue here?
So anything that is increasing the prison industrial complex, we need to look at very carefully because it is largely going to impact our communities. Our communities are the ones that cannot afford legal representation in the same way that other groups are. And our communities are the ones that will actually be charged as opposed to just given a warning. And so I think we need to, yes, it is a little bit of an inconvenience to ring a bell, but I'm going to ring a bell rather than have the sons in my community get locked up over stealing deodorant.
The one thing I always am a little bit leery when we look at look at propositions like this is that be very cognizant that sometimes the amplification of things may make you make policy decisions that you regret later. So therefore, the amplification of minority youth, particularly black and brown youth, say for example, in a going into the store and taking the items is not a good thing. But note how the agenda of basically making that seem like a epidemic of something when in reality it may still be a rarity, but the prescription is something that is really permanent. And that's what we have to think about as we go through and make a decision about a law that will have manifest, and it may be bringing a sledgehammer to basically a very small problem.
And if I could just add,
Last point.
Two of the ringleaders that were caught were not us. They were in Orange County that were actually hiring those kids across the state.
So, I don't want to make voting more complicated than what it already is. I know that it could be intimidating. I know that it could be convoluted. I know that it could be confusing. And so we're going to make this simple. Everyone say simple. Say simple. Say it's easy to vote. We got the right to vote. It is our duty to vote. Our community depends on it. So, when we're doing our voting plan, the first thing, well, let me ask you this. How many of you plan to vote? All right. So, how many of you plan to make sure that everyone in your household that's eligible is voting? How many of you, this is a curveball. How many of you have someone in your house that's at least 17, that will be 18 years old by the time November 5th comes around and they're not registered to vote? It should, I'm not gonna count, I'm not gonna say how many hands we got, but let me just say this. This part is especially for you, okay? We have to make sure that our communities are engaged and ready. So the first thing we're gonna do, remember at the very beginning, pull out your phones, because we have these handy QR codes. The first thing we have to do in our vote plan is check your registration. Doesn't so much happen here in California, but we know in other places, voter rolls get purged. Here's the other part. If any of you have moved since the last election, if any of you have changed your voter registration since the last election, whatever the case is, you want to make sure that your voter registration is accurate and it reflects who you are, where you live, so that you're voting on the things that impact you and your community. So you can scan the handy QR code, and that will help you check your voter registration. You scan it, and it'll tell you, my name is Shannon Lawrence, I live here. I'm not gonna tell y'all my address. I'm gonna try knocking on my door. I live here, and this is the party I belong to, and it's gonna confirm all of that for you. And that's gonna take, and that's no matter where you are in the state of California, that QR code will verify that for you. The next thing you wanna do is you have the opportunity to complete your ballot before you actually complete your ballot. Did you know that? What that means is you can scan that QR code. It's going to take you to this really cool website called Ballotpedia. Ballotpedia.com. And you can put in your address, and it will tell you exactly what's on your ballot based on where you live. And then you can start going through, say, I think I want to vote for this, I think I want to vote for that, I think I want to vote for this person, that person, and here's part of the planning. If you want to, you can think about how you want to vote, and then pull out your sample ballot if you want to do some more research, and make sure that what you put on your personal sample ballot is really what you want to reflect in the vote before November 5th, okay? So just like, remember when you was in school, and the teacher would give you a quiz before the test to make sure that you kind of understood a concept, that's your quiz. That's your quiz right there. But it's a personal, and guess what? You could take it as many times as you want. You could fill it out, you could change it, you could cross stuff out, you could ask questions, all of that stuff ahead of time. So you want to take advantage of that. And then the last thing is now here's the kicker. All of you, because this is California, should have received your ballot in the mail already. How many ways do we have to actually cast your ballot? How many think is one way to cast your ballot? Raise your hand. How many think it's two ways to cast your ballot? It's three ways. It's two. You can either drop it off in a ballot box, which are located all over the county. They're all over. They're little yellow and they're yellow and blue boxes, and you drop it off in there. Sometimes at parks, in front of buildings. You just drop it off, and about every 3 or 4 days, a county official will come by and they'll empty it out and they'll take it down to Norwalk if you live here in LA County, and it just sit there until election day. Or you can go to what we call vote centers. Now, you remember when we used to be able to go vote at a polling place? And sometimes a polling place might be in your neighbor's garage. Sometimes it's at a local park. Sometimes it's at a church. Sometimes it could be at a grocery store, wherever it is. But now we have polling centers. So how many of you know where your polling location is? Guess what? Nobody had a hand raised. We don't have polling locations anymore. I mean, you don't have your own polling place. You don't have a precinct anymore. If you live in the county of Los Angeles, you can vote anywhere. That means I'm at work and I'm like, you know what? I got an extra 10 minutes on my lunch break. Let me go on and drop this thing off at a poll, or let me go on and go vote. I can do that. And all I'm gonna do is I'll walk in, I'm gonna tell them my name, I'm gonna tell them my address. I don't even think you have to show an ID anymore, right? You don't have to show an ID, you just tell them your name. Yeah, tell me your name, tell me your address, and they're gonna say, okay, they do some technical stuff, and they load it up, and then you take your ballot to one of the vote machines, and your ballot, based on where you live, is gonna pop up. So you can vote anywhere in LA County, and guess what? If you scan that QR code that says cast your ballot, it'll tell you, based on where you are, you could just put in the zip code where you are at that moment, it'll tell you where the closest polling location is or the closest drop box is. Very, very simple. Was that simple enough? Yeah. So what are we gonna do? The first thing, make sure we're gonna check our registration. The second thing is we're gonna do our sample ballot. And the third thing is we're gonna cast our ballot. And the last thing, which is probably most important, is we're gonna tell a friend, right? We're gonna make sure all of our friends are voting, right? All right, all hearts and minds clear? You feel good? We ready? All right.
Have you been blessed today? Has this been very informative? Okay, so look, I want you to help me praise God for all of our panelists. Seriously, help me praise God for all of our panelists. Thank you very much. I know you drove far. You came all the way up from up north, but I just want to thank you all for and all of our donors and sponsors. Come on, help me praise God. Help me praise God for our sponsors. I do want to say this. I need you to understand this, that you're not voting for a pastor to be president. You got real quiet. I need you to understand that. Jesus is not on the ballot. He's not. I just need to be very, very clear. He's not. So we're getting questions about, well, if you're a Christian, are you supposed to be connected to this party? If you're a Christian, you're supposed to be connected to that party. If you're a Christian, you're supposed to be connected to Jesus. That's number one. That's number one. Now, this is so complex because there are issues on either side that can make you say, this sounds like a Christian idea, Christian concept. This sounds like I'm in hell. This sounds like a Christian idea. This sounds like I'm in hell. Why? You're not voting for Jesus. So I need you to understand it. You're going to have to make the best educational, spiritual vote you can for yourself, okay? And I'm trying to be as in the middle as possible. Now, I want to share this statistic with you because it's in my dissertation. Since the last election, you can Google this and find it yourself. It's called a mass exodus and a black exodus. When churches started telling you what to do, who to vote for, and you're not Christian if you don't vote for this individual, they left the church. There's statistics saying that the church, people came to church to be built up spiritually. You guys are keen enough and wise enough in how to make your vote. A pastor doesn't need to tell you what to do. Now, there may be some issues you're wrestling with that a pastor, I can help navigate you through, but for the most part, you know what to do. Now, young adults have discredited the church because of the church's siding with political parties. It's facts, it's data. There are others who have said, I'm not going to go to the church anymore because I'm trying to get fed spiritually, but they keep pushing me towards these political ideas and these political campaigns. So we're not going to do that. I want you to make the best educational vote that you can based on your biblical opinion and your biblical convictions, okay? These gentlemen, these ladies are going to help you in what that means and in how you're supposed to vote. But what I don't want you to do, because one of the questions here is kind of heartbreaking, because for you to think that you're less of a Christian based on a political party is not biblical at all. So I'm just saying it's not biblical at all. It's not biblical at all. So you're going to have to wrestle with some tension with what decision you make based on whoever you decide to vote for. And if you need spiritual guidance in something you have tension in, we got pastors everywhere. Pastor Bob, I can help you navigate through some of it. We have Pastor George here if you're in tension between something else. But whatever you do, please vote. Make sure that you're registered. Make sure that you vote. And let me tell you something. When these local votes are over, and when the national vote is over, you know what? You know who's still going to be on the throne? In the last decade or two, we have seen we've had different figures, I'll say it that way, who have led our country. We're still here, and God still reigns. So my position is, and I said this at KJLH, I have to believe in God's sovereignty. Vote, please vote. But I can't get fearful, I can't get worried, I can't be sick, I can't lose sleep if I believe in God's power, God's sovereignty, and God's providence. Because his sovereignty and providence means no matter what happens, no matter who wins, he's still going to bring me through. And can I say this to my black church members for about 2 seconds? Now, with all that we've gone through, we might as well sing "We Shall Overcome" right now. We've overcome so much as a people. You think that an election is going to stop you for God from taking us where we need to be? It's not going to happen. But I'm praying that the power of God, the wisdom of God, and wisdom of knowledge and discernment will help guide you in your ballot. But whatever you do, don't lose sleep. Don't shiver in fear. We just did Philippians. Cast your cares on him. Don't be anxious for anything, but in all things, by prayer and supplication, let your requests be known to God. So as you vote, please vote. Understand that God is still sovereign, God is still in control, and that he will guide us to wherever we need to be. And if Jesus comes back, I'm ready. Because Paul said to live is Christ and to die is gain. So to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Do you have eternal life? Do you have assurance? That's the most important thing. But these gentlemen, this lady here, they're doing their very, very best to put us in the best position to make an educational vote, an educational decision. So help me praise God for this environment, this platform, these panelists. God, I thank you for this platform, Lord. I thank you just for the ability to come together and wrestle through issues as human beings, God. Lord, you have given us free will. You've given us the ability to choose and to make decisions. So, Lord, as we are using that ability in our ability to vote, help us, God. Guide us. Help us to stand on your word and what your word says about these issues. And Lord, help us to do it in a way that will give you honor, glory, and praise. God, help our city. Help our state. Help our nation. We cannot do this without you, God. So help us to be light that shines in this dark world so that when people see the good works that we do, they will glorify you, our Father in heaven. We thank you so much for these panelists, God. Bless them for what they've poured out. Help them with safe travel, mercies, and grace as they travel home. Bless their households. Bless all that you've given them stewardship over. And Lord, as we make these decisions, help us to honor you. We thank you for this safe place to wrestle together as brothers and sisters in Christ. We say this prayer in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen and amen.
The views and opinions shared in this conversation are personal and not connected to Faithful Central Bible Church. As a 501c3 organization, we don't endorse or oppose any political candidates, propositions, or measures. This is just for information and discussion, not an endorsement of any kind.